Hey everyone, this is Zoey, the co-host and curator of Research and Resource Rounds, a mini cast from the Docs with Disabilities initiative. I'm popping in to introduce this special bonus podcast. The Docs with Disabilities episode 76 features Dr. Kara Ayers, whose work is reviewed in episode 3 of the Research and Resource Rounds podcast. We now bring you that episode here featuring her 2022 article titled The Evolution of Disability Language, Choosing Terms to Describe Disability. Ayers co-wrote this piece with Erin Andrews and Robin Powell. I also invite you to head over to the Research and Resource Rounds podcast feed to check out our other episodes, each of which discusses, in 15 minutes or less, a different article on disability inclusion in medicine. Plus, it's our anniversary. Research and Resource Rounds is turning 1 this September, and we'd love your help spreading the word about this educational and important minicast.
Hello, and welcome to the Research and Resource Rounds podcast, an offshoot of our Docs with Disabilities podcast.
Every month, we will bring you 2 episodes of our new minicast. Each minicast reviews a research article or commentary about disability in medical education.
We bring you, the listener, an easily digestible way to become familiar with this growing body of literature. Research outcomes and calls to action within the literature are then paired with parallel resources for improving the inclusion of healthcare learners, trainees, and professionals with disabilities. We also explore publications that address the status of, need for, and benefits of disability representation among the medical education curricula.
In the process, we hope that you, our listeners, learn more about the research and the resources in this area.
And find some new ways to conceptualize disability and why it belongs in medicine.
I'm Lisa Meeks.
I'm Peter Poulos.
I'm Zoey Martin-Lockhart, the curator and co-host of Research and Resource Rounds, and we are thrilled to bring you this important and impactful information. Today on Research and Resource Rounds, we are reviewing The Evolution of Disability Language, Choosing Terms to Describe Disability, as part of our collection, Disability in the Health Sciences, Key Arguments and Issues at Stake, Language and History. Erin Andrews, Robin Powell, and Kara Ayers published this article in Disability and Health Journal in April 2022. The 3 authors lead us, the readers, through a series of models used to conceptualize disability and the terminology associated with each model. They provide in-depth explorations of person-first and identity-first language, recommend avoiding euphemisms, and argue against the language restrictions imposed by some style guides. The authors start and end their paper, The Evolution of Disability Language, by calling for organizations and journals to implement flexibility in their style guides. This change would allow authors to adjust their language to match the context and preferences of those they are writing about, in recognition that people vary in their terminological preferences and self-conceptualizations. The 4 disability models enumerated in this article are ordered chronologically, revealing changing cultural perspectives on disability in the United States. The models also capture conflicting paradigms of disability that today exist simultaneously. Disability language is the phrase used by these authors for the varied terminology used to reference, describe, and name disability broadly and specific disabilities. Remember, language is not static, and people's disability language preferences differ. Warning: in this episode, I will be using some disability language used to stigmatize disability, and which is now considered outdated or offensive in most contexts. Please note, while some words have been or are being reclaimed by portions of the disability communities, others remain offensive. Terminology preferences vary, and not everyone is comfortable reclaiming phrases used against them. Language is powerful. The article's introduction highlights, quote, the role of language in shaping our reality and subsequent behaviors, close quote. Language is shaped and shaped by distinct paradigms or models for conceptualizing disability, what it is, its effects and causes, what it signifies, and how to respond to and live with it. Models of disability can be found under the article's History of Disability Terminology subsection. Model 1, the moral model. The moral model is an old framework that makes sense of disability as the consequence of amorality or sinfulness. Language buttressing this perspective includes cripple and lame, which gained stigmatizing connotations in the 1800s, despite originating in the 900s. Cripple has been reclaimed by some disabled communities and scholars who adopt crip identity as a source of pride and produce scholarly crip theory. Thus, words change meaning over time, acquiring and losing distinctive connotations, denotations, and colloquial usages. Model 2, the medical model. The medical model sees disability as a problem to be fixed. This framework looks for and classifies problems and pathologies, which is therefore how it makes sense of disability. The authors describe the language of the medical model as clinical. Examples include labeling groups and individuals with the name of their condition or diagnosis, the mentally ill, the blind, or, in a healthcare setting, the paraplegic in room 1. This language can dehumanize people by seeing them first and foremost as a condition. Pushback against the medical model and attendant linguistic shifts occurred largely in the past half-century. Model 3, the social model. The social model arose from discontent with the stigma and medicalization of disability generated by the medical model. This framework emphasizes the social construction of disability. Impairments are not automatically disabilities. Instead, exclusion and stigma, physical infrastructure, and cultural beliefs all inform what counts and what is experienced as disability. Person-first language emerged in response to the medical model. Its intention is to emphasize the personhood of people with disability, thus, hopefully, combating the conflation of people with their stigmatized impairments. Person-first language does what it says on the box, putting the person first and their disability or diagnosis second. Person-first terminology includes phrases like doctors with disabilities or a woman with autism. Person-first language became dominant in the last 2 or 3 decades among institutions and style guides. The Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 uses person-first disability language. Yet, some disabled people are concerned that person-first language is framed as being the only appropriate and respectful disability language. Model 4, the diversity or sociopolitical model. The diversity or sociopolitical model goes by either name. It also sees social and environmental factors as instrumental in the way disability is understood and experienced. A few examples. Those who cannot sit for long periods of time are disabled because desk work is the norm. People with ADHD are disabled because schools often time exams and assign a particular format of homework. Autistic people are disabled because some non-typical social behavior is considered weird or a problem instead of just an expected variation. The diversity or sociopolitical model adopts a civil rights framework and approach to disability. The model emphasizes disability pride and disability rights. It rejects personal, cultural, and political evaluations of disability as bad, wrong, or a failure. Instead, it reframes the stigmatization, exclusion, and lack of access experienced by disabled people as the problem. The aspirations of the diversity or sociopolitical model are captured by a quote from J.F. Smart and D. Smart, 2006, cited by Andrews, Powell, and Ayers that I feel compelled to include here. Quote, "A perfect world is not a world without disabilities, but a world in which accommodations and services are provided to people with disabilities and, more important, disability is not viewed as inferiority." Close quote. Because disability is a source of pride and not of dehumanization, those favoring this model often adopt identity-first language, which leads with disability. Examples include disabled doctor or autistic woman. It is important to note that before identity-first language became widespread, deaf culture and communities claimed and centered their capital D deaf identity. The choice between person-first and identity-first language can be difficult. The article delves into a deep examination of each and comparison of the two. Person-first language has been required by many scholarly and news media organizations, including the American Medical Association, the Associated Press, and the American Psychological Association. Indeed, many scholars and reporters may not be allowed to choose which language they prefer. These language policy restrictions also remove choice from the individuals that scholars and reporters write about. While these organizations are trying to show respect for and protect the humanity and dignity of disabled people, these strict guidelines remove autonomy, a hallmark of personhood, from disabled people and disability scholars. Person-first language can be clunky and unwieldy. Consider person with deafness versus the concise word deaf. Moreover, research results question the efficacy of person-first language in humanizing disabled people. Some studies cited in the article suggest that it does the opposite, subtly signaling that disability is undesirable by differentiating a person's disability from their personhood. Identity-first language may be reminiscent of medical model terminology that emphasizes a condition or diagnosis first. Yet, identity-first language as used today, particularly by disabled people and advocates, is an instance of marginalized groups reclaiming language that historically propagated stigma. Identity-first language functions as a claim of disability identity and membership in disability communities for many disabled people. The authors conclude by celebrating a change in the recent 7th edition of the American Psychological Association Style Manual, which now endorses identity-first and person-first language both, and call on other organizations, guides, and journals to do the same. Finally, a reflection on the use of euphemisms. Using the word disability can be intimidating. This is why some resort to using euphemisms, a practice this article decries. Common euphemisms include differently abled, physically challenged, special needs, and handy-capable. Preferable direct language is physical disability instead of physically challenged, intellectual disability instead of special needs, and simply disabled instead of differently abled or handy-capable. Indeed, a recent online hashtag campaign, Say the Word, calls on all of us to say the word and not to back away from saying and forefronting disability. We like to wrap up each episode by highlighting some resources for listeners interested in learning more about or implementing changes related to disability training and inclusion in the health sciences. We recommend those interested check out, first, Stanford's Disability Language Guide, which can be found online as a PDF at disability.stanford.edu, and second, the World Health Organization's explainer titled Disability, People with Disability versus Persons with Disabilities. This piece was published on December 7, 2020. The short piece by the WHO explains the different philosophies between the phrases people with disability, singular, and persons with disabilities, plural. In short, a singular usage acknowledges that disability is an expansive, common experience among human beings and is not binary but rather a continuum. Most of us do or will have disability of some kind to some extent. We will include links to these resources in the show notes. The next episode of Research and Resource Rounds looks at the numbers. How many people with disabilities are represented in medicine? How is this distributed across the continuum from training to practice? And how do we measure these populations? We'd love to hear from you. What are some resources that you recommend? Publications, social and digital media, training exercises, and more. You can reach the show on Twitter at DocsWith or email us at DocsWithDisabilitiespodcast@gmail.com. Subject line, Research and Resource Rounds Podcast. Thank you for listening.
This minicast is a production of the Docs with Disabilities initiative and is supported by the Ford Foundation. It is released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Non-Derivative License. The series was developed by Lisa Meeks and Zoey Martin-Lockhart and is produced by Zoey Martin-Lockhart, Lisa Meeks, and Jacob Feeman.